Hello there folks, it is Toby from TIJ Music. Welcome to a new video. Today it is time for a Thin Lizzy album review, their second album of 1976, following up the big, huge hit Jailbreak. It is this album that sits behind me, the vinyl copy. It is Johnny the Fox, released in October 1976, only 7 months after the hit Jailbreak in March of the same year. And most of the content for this was written while Phil Lynott was recovering from a bout of hepatitis in June and July. He got a bout of hepatitis halfway through the Jailbreak tour, and everything that could have gone wrong for Thin Lizzy on a tour always did, basically, and that's probably one of the reasons they never cracked America. But in the months of June and July, Phil Lynott, that's it, Phil Lynott, it's a bit of a mouthful, especially when you're on camera. He wrote most of the material in June and July while he was in hospital, and the band convened to record that material in August. But the producer, John Alcott, thinks that the album suffered because Lynott didn't have enough time to finish tracks, and that's why the tracks like Boogie, Woogie, Dance managed to get on the album. They weren't strong enough to get on the album, but we'll discuss that a little bit later on. This is the last Thin Lizzy album where Brian Robertson is a full member of the band because he had real bad personality clash between himself and Phil Lynott, which ultimately managed to get him sacked, albeit he got reinstated again and then sacked again. But this was the first time that he was sacked, and you know the seeds were sown really by this point. This album also had a hit single in Don't Believe a Word that got to number 12 in the UK singles charts, and of course, who can forget the album cover? Let's show the vinyl. I know you can see it in the corner, but let's show the vinyl. Absolutely fantastic album cover, continuing in the same vein as Nightlife and Jailbreak, and even the back cover is really nice with the 4 members of the band and the track list. It's really excellent stuff, drawn and illustrated by their brilliant album cover artist Jim Fitzpatrick, and he was given the task, of course, to design the sleeve, and Phil Lynott asked him to do that before the album had got a title. He wants sort of a Celtic feel, and that's exactly what he wants, but he drew a complicated neo-Gothic Celtic border, and believe me, this is all from online. I have no idea what this is all about. With a disc in the centre, you can see, without the fox, which is now there, in the centre. And it was left blank in the for the title and the central design. And when the deadline was approaching, he asked Lynott what he wanted him to do. And Lynott said, we'll call the album Johnny the Fox. We'll call it Johnny the Fox. It'll be a huge hit. And Fitzpatrick went, well, there's no title track called Johnny the Fox. Nobody will care. It's fine. And that's why there's the fox in the middle. But there was originally a design whereby a fox's head came through the middle, and that was rejected by the record company. But an earlier Fitzpatrick design actually depicted a warrior in the centre. But Lynott and Fitzpatrick, they both felt that it needs to be sort of an outsider figure, much like the panther on the cover of Nightlife. And this album, depending on who you speak to, is largely considered to be a step down from their hit album Jailbreak, but the level of that slump is really debatable depending on the reviews that you consume. And of course now, I'm going to put my 2 pence of him. So what I do in these reviews, if this is your first time watching a TIJ music review, I go through each single track, discuss each individual track, and give it a rating out of 10. And then at the end of the review, we take an average of those and deliver a verdict. So we kick off the track with track number 1, Johnny. This is a great rocker, really great rocker to kick things off. It's not an ultimate Thin Lizzy track, don't get me wrong. It does drop a point here, it's only a 9 out of 10. But that guitar solo at the end of the track, it's sublime. 9 out of 10, great start to the album. Track number 2 is Rocky, and if there's only one thing that anybody really can agree on that Thin Lizzy did well, there are many things, but one thing that they did well, it's the guitar riffs, it's the guitars, the dual guitars, the sound that are developed with Brian Robertson and Scott Gorham. Absolutely fantastic. And the guitar riff on this track is as catchy and as good as they come. The lyrics, of course, are great too, punchy, aggressive, and it just continues in the same vein as the previous tracks. This one is a 9 out of 10. And interestingly, Brian Robertson thinks that Phil Lynott wrote this track about him. Interesting. Track number 3, Borderline. It's the first ballad from the album. And you have to say, another thing that Thin Lizzy and Phil Lynott in particular did very well. Slower songs and ballads. I'll just point you in the way of Still in Love with You from Nightlife for that. They did ballads really well with Thin Lizzy. They did the real good heavy stuff, which we'll see later on in the album. But they also did this stuff very well. Borderline, a brilliant track. Excellent lyrics. Co-written with Brian Robertson here. Lynott reckons that this song is about an old girlfriend and he was in really in love, but she hated him. Oh, bless. And he was extremely down when he wrote it. This, again, is another 9 out of 10. Not perfect, but great, all the same. We then get to track number 4. And this is the first perfect track from the album. I'm not particularly a singles man usually. I'm more of a deep cut man, but this is just perfect. The formula is excellent here. It's a 10 out of 10. And that, of course, is track 4, Don't Believe a Word. It's the album single and a great one at that. It's a bit more hard-hitting, but I do find it fairly similar to their single Danced in the Moonlight from the Bad Reputation album. That track's a bit more gimmicky, but I can see similarities, albeit maybe subtle, between the two tracks. Short but sweet. It's only 2 minutes. It is short but sweet. The first 10 out of 10 from this album. It's a true Thin Lizzy classic. It's timeless. The guitars, the guitar riff is just top notch. Everything about this track is perfect. But it wasn't meant to be at first, because Lynott and Robertson once again clashed over the composition, because Lynott first played the song to the band in sort of a slow blues format, and Robertson said it was shite. And I guess Lynott said, well, go on then, you do better. And Lynott walked off for a few days in a bit of a grump. And when he came back, Robertson and Brian Downey had developed a brilliant, faster shuffle rhythm and a riff and a great drum beat as well. And Lynott was quite pleased with the outcome when he came back to the studio. But the song, interestingly, was only credited to Phil Lynott in the end. And Robertson, I think fairly rightly, is a little bit irked about that, because the original, which can be seen on the 1978 album Back on the Street by Gary Moore, which Phil Lynott contributed on, and also the Life album from 1983. The original version's on there and it's great. But would it have had the single attraction? Absolutely not. And of course, Thin Lizzy weren't a singles band, but sometimes, whoever you are, you need a few singles to keep propping you up, and ultimately to get fans to discover you. So Don't Believe a Word was far better in terms of the album version anyway, for being encouraged by Robbo and Downey to be a bit of a more hard-hitting, faster shuffle rhythm. And it's a great track, it is sublime, and has to be a 10 out of 10. We then round off side 1, and side 1 really just shows how good of an album band that Thin Lizzy were. And Fool's Gold is the final track from side 1. Another 10 out of 10. And section 3, right? Section 3 in things that Thin Lizzy did very well. Storytelling. Phil Lynott's lyrics are poetic. And I have got, courtesy of the old man, my dad, a book of poetry from Phil Lynott. And basically, it's not necessarily a book of poetry as such, but it's some of his lyrics, which I did show in the Jailbreak review. You can see there's some lyrics to some of his best written tracks, and also some illustrations, which I'll show you a little bit later on when they come up in the track listing. But this is a great example of that poetry which Phil Lynott has in his lyrics. It has to be another 10 out of 10. And on side 1, there's an incredible combination of slower tracks, the likes of Borderline, the hard-hitting tracks, Johnny and Rocky, and then, of course, this, which is somewhere kind of in the middle, I suppose. And this is an excellent, excellent track. It works, and I think it only works because it's Thin Lizzy, and they pull it off so well. It's inspired by the Great Famine of Ireland and depicts that people go to America to start a new life. But that introduction, the spoken word introduction, followed by that slower guitar riff, that bluesy guitar riff, it just takes you to another place. It is excellent, and it rounds off side 1 having to be a 10 out of 10. And side 1 of this album, if you are to compare to Jailbreak, matches, it maybe even beats it, but it's a close one. So then we move on to track number 6, halfway through the album. Track number 6, which starts side 2 of the album with Johnny the Fox meets Jimmy the Weed. And you probably won't believe me here, but this is actually the first Thin Lizzy track that I listened to and liked. It was from the Live and Dangerous album. I had a thing when I was 6. I had an iPod Classic when I was 6 or 7, and I would just shuffle tracks, and this was the first Thin Lizzy track I heard. And I really liked it, but I have to say, it's probably the first weak point on the album. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a great track, but it's definitely a step down from the sublime side 1. Lyrically, it's good, the riffs are good, but I'm always left wanting a little bit more from this. And I have to say, it's probably an album track, and maybe nothing more. It's still an 8 out of 10 from my opinion, but nothing more than that. But Scott Gorham, interestingly, said in an interview that it was the only song really that Thin Lizzy did in a sort of funk style. And Phil Lynott was a big fan of the OJs from the 70s and their great track For the Love of Money, which is become repopularised over the last few years as being the introduction to the Celebrity Apprentice. You know, that one that that little-known chap Donald Trump did. Wonder what he's doing these days. And once that they tried to almost try and match that riff, they went for it. And Downey had his personal funk take on the drums. And actually, those characters, Johnny the Fox and Jimmy the Weed, they were actually real people. They were from the Manchester area, where Phil Lynott's mom had her hotel. And they were basically a part of a gang of thieves. They weren't drug dealers, but they were pretty heavy. But they were really funny, so you couldn't help but like them. And yeah, absolutely great story. And there's a few funny articles online whereby somebody has drawn up that this is definitely a concept album. It's certainly, you can tell that it's a loose concept album with the Johnny the Fox idea and a few other anecdotes in there as well. But somebody has drawn up quite an interesting concept for this album, which I'm not too sure about, but there is certainly, particularly from this track, a loose concept to it. Track number 7 then, Old Flame. This is another 8 out of 10. I'm going to show the picture from the book here. I've put in my notes, show picture. Thank you very much, past Toby. This is on page 11. And a little bit of a story about this. This is the lyrics to Old Flame along with the illustration. Hopefully I don't get banned from YouTube for showing a bit of nudity. This was the picture that my dad, when he was at high school, back in the 70s, when this came out, he drew that picture for his art project. Just a little bit of an anecdote for you there. But this continues side 2 in a bit of a similar vein. It doesn't really go anywhere, but Phil loves a ballad, and he does a ballad well. There's some great lyrical content here. It's a good track, but not excellent. It's an 8 out of 10 again. It's a good track, but as I said, like Johnny the Fox meets Jimmy the Weed, it's nothing more really. We then move on to track number 8. Again, show picture. Thank you very much. And that track is Massacre. Now, believe it or not, there are some people who think this track is not very good. Here's the brilliant illustration from, of course, Jim Fitzpatrick here. Absolutely fantastic illustration in the book. One of the few illustrations, and it's just excellent. But there are some reviews I've read, watched, that don't like this track. Now, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but on this one, are you crazy? This is just a Thin Lizzy classic, no question about it. One of those tracks that, like all of them, I guess, sounds undoubtedly better live, but the studio version's brilliant too. The guitars, the drum beat from Brian Downey, it's sublime. And I always feel a bit guilty in my reviews for not mentioning the drums. The guitars, the vocals are front and centre, so it's so easy to pick up on those. But the drum beat from Brian Downey here is excellent. It's quite reminiscent to the title track from Jailbreak, and it's just excellent. Excellent lyrics, awesome vocals, awesome riffage. What is not to like? It's a Thin Lizzy classic. It is absolutely sublime. But that is probably the last good track on the album. Track number 9, Sweet Marie. And this one gets plenty of flack, much like Old Flame does for being a little bit soft, not wholesome enough. But I like it. It's not bad. It's not a Thin Lizzy classic, but it's a good album track. It adds to some of the melancholy that the album portrays. But I think I'd be doing a disservice to everything else on the album for giving this anything over a 7. And then we move on to the final track. Right. Who bribed them to do this one? Track number 10, Boogie Woogie Dance. I said earlier that producer John Alcock felt that because there wasn't enough time for Lynott to write tracks, that tracks like this slipped in. And I can understand why. It's a 6 out of 10, but that's been very, very generous. Real head scratcher here. I find many albums have this. There's always just one track that stops it from being a top album. You had it on A Night at the Opera with Sweet Lady. The album that came before this, Jailbreak, with Fight or Fall. British Steel by Judas Priest with United. There are so many more examples. I could sit here all day. The guitar riff stops this from being awful, but the lyrics are questionable to say the least. In France, they've got a dance, a real crazy dance. In Spain, they give it a name, a real chic, cheeky name. And then in Brazil, they got a pill, a real hard power-packed pill. No. Doesn't work. And I can completely get from this track why people would say it's a slump from Jailbreak. It's certainly not as consistent as it. But there is some Thin Lizzy bias here, but it's certainly nothing above a 6. So that gives us a rating out of 10, which isn't as good as Jailbreak, but it's still a very solid rating. This album comes out at an 8.6 out of 10. And okay, I'll hold my hands up. Overall, this album might not be as good as Jailbreak, and Jailbreak came out at 9.3. I've done a review of Jailbreak on the channel. It came out at 9.3 out of 10. Once I actually managed to get my maths right. I thanked the viewer a few weeks ago who left a comment to say, hang on, your maths isn't right. And it absolutely wasn't. I've been having a bad day and completely forgetting how to do maths and division and all the rest of it. But Jailbreak came out at a 9.3. But this is hardly a slump. It's not a massive slump like some people think it is anyway. Side 1 by itself, it matches Jailbreak with Johnny, Rocky, Borderline, Don't Believe a Word and Fool's Gold. Side 2, yes, slips a little. There's a real set of brilliant tracks, Fool's Gold, Massacre, Don't Believe a Word, Borderline, etc. But equally, there are some really poor tracks, like Boogie Woogie Dance. And it's interesting, it's not a perfect album, but it is certainly a very good album, and there is no question that Thin Lizzy are one of the best album bands, period. One of the most underrated bands. Probably a lot of people who have got to this point know that fact, definitely. But that's going to be it for today's review. I've really enjoyed that. I've really enjoyed sitting back on this Sunday morning, listening to Johnny the Fox on the record player, and some excellent riffage. Really good stuff and excellent lyrics as well. And excellent drum beat. Brian Downey, I'm not leaving you out. But that's going to be it for today's album review. If you enjoyed that, leave a like down below. Forward this on to anyone else who you think might enjoy it. Maybe a Thin Lizzy fan of old, or somebody that only has listened to Jailbreak perhaps and wants to go a bit further into Thin Lizzy. Also make sure to leave your comments down below saying what you think of the album, and also make sure to subscribe to TIJ Music for weekly album reviews, top 10s and all the rest of it. I've been Toby from TIJ Music. Thank you very much for your company today, and I'll see you all in the next video of mine. I'll see you all later. Goodbye for now.